One day last week, I spent a morning taking questions about AI from middle school and high school students in Chicago. Their classes had been listening to a public radio documentary that I'd made with the Pulitzer Center called The Race to Superintelligence. And you should have seen their faces when we talked about the relationship between AI and video games. But then someone asked how they could tell who's really a human on social media. And I had to say, you can't tell. Not unless you've met that person in real life. But a lot of people are thinking about this and working on ways to make it better. On this week's show, we're going to meet one of them. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in
As the disc rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte I present to you Electro, the Moto Man.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
This episode, it's the latest installment of our oral history project. This episode is brought to you by Tools and Weapons, the podcast exploring technology's impact on our changing world, hosted by Microsoft's Vice Chair and President Brad Smith. Across 3 exclusive conversations celebrating the company's 50th anniversary, Microsoft's CEOs Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, and Satya Nadella share the untold stories, big dreams, and relentless drive that's fueled a digital revolution. Hear why each of them thinks that the revolution may be at its most exciting point yet. Find the CEO series and other impactful conversations with government, business, and cultural leaders by searching for Tools and Weapons, wherever you listen to podcasts. My household's love for Quince started with a silk dress. It's lightweight, comfortable, and always on point. The surprising part is everything with Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than what you'd expect to find for premium fabrics and finishes at similar brands. By working directly with artisans and cutting out the middlemen, Quince gives you luxury pieces without the markup. And for me, the best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. We own a number of their items, including school polos for my kids and summer weight cashmere. The craftsmanship and quality have consistently been off the charts. Elevate your closet with Quince. Go to quince.com/shift for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/shift to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/shift.
World Protocol is an identity and financial network to give access to all people to the internet and allow them to know that they are humans as they're interacting online. I'm Adrian Ludwig, and I'm the chief architect at Tools for Humanity. Tools for Humanity is a startup that is working to build, amongst other things, the World Protocol. So for a long time, people have been using the internet. We think of the internet as something that we built for people. In practice, the internet is something that we built for computers to talk to one another. And that was fine because for a long time we could tell the difference between a computer and a human. But at this point, with AI becoming more and more capable, it's becoming really difficult to tell the difference between people and AI or computers. And so we realized that the internet needs to have a new sort of basic primitive, which is whether the thing you're interacting with is actually a person and whether it's acting on behalf of a person. This is really important in the context of things like social networks or games, dating services, pretty much anything at its root. There's an assumption that you're interacting with another person. And so what we're building is the ability to confirm that that's true and know that you are, in fact, interacting with another person. In the early days, before Tools for Humanity was even a company, Sam Altman, Alex Blania, several other members of the founding team were sitting around thinking about what are the most important problems that we're going to be facing on the internet going into the future. And what came out of that discussion was a realization that AI was getting more and more sophisticated, getting more and more capable. And that led to a discussion about what are the tools that you would need to protect humanity in that future world. With that, Tools for Humanity was born as a concept. And they began talking about things like the World Protocol, which is what we're spending most of our time right now working to build at Tools for Humanity. One of the core challenges that we're running into is we can't tell the difference between a good AI online and a person. And when I say good, I don't mean like acting positively. What I mean is like a sophisticated one, a really capable one. 20 years ago, you could ask in a chat window whether something was AI or not, and it couldn't trick you. 15 years ago, it started to be able to trick you in a chat window. And at this point, even in full audio or even in full video, AI is capable of producing a simulacrum of another human at a level of fidelity that's sufficiently high that the average person can't tell the difference. And so at this point on the internet, it's basically impossible for you to tell the difference between a human and AI. And so over the last 30 or 40 years, we've been thinking about how do you add security to protect the internet and make it a place where we can focus on the good things that it can deliver. And only recently have we begun to realize that one area that we haven't done that is protecting the core element of what is a human. And so that's what Tools for Humanity started working on. Started trying to think about how do we solve that problem? And the World Protocol is a first attempt at trying to solve that problem, providing a proof of humanity, which uses data from outside of the internet and then connects it to the internet in a way that is as robust as possible. So we're using a camera, something called the orb, to take a series of pictures of an individual, using that camera to confirm that they are a real human in the real world, because we're not worried about androids quite yet in the sense of robots walking around that can fake themselves as being a human. We're really only worried at this point about purely online entities being able to replicate a human. The orb allows us to confirm that this is a real human that has presented themselves. They get a credential from the orb that says this is a real human. We can confirm that they are a unique human, which solves for one of the biggest challenges that AI presents to the online world, which is the ability for a single person or a single piece of software to produce lots and lots of accounts and then use those accounts in a coordinated way. There's a phrase that gets used in the security community called a Sybil attack. And so one of the properties that we're looking for is not only is it a human, but it's a unique human. And then we use some cryptography to connect that identity in a way that is privacy enhancing so that they can use whatever services that person wants to use online and do so knowing that what they're doing on a gaming site is separate from what they're doing on a social network site, is separate from what they do with their wallet, is separate from what they do with their bank, is separate from and they get to control all those interactions. And so the World Protocol is trying to do exactly that, make it possible for a human to have a identity online as a human, protect the internet against some of the most prevalent attacks, things like Sybil attacks, and do that in a privacy enhancing way so that people are able to use whatever services they want in the most comfortable way for them. So that's what we've been working on, and we're making really good progress. So I've been in computer security, and building internet services for my entire career, close to 30 years at this point, maybe even a little bit more than that, depending on when you say you actually started doing real work. And throughout that entire time, one of the challenges that we've had in building services is that they're prone to abuse, that sometimes there's people who behave well and sometimes there's people who behave not so well. And so that has been at the front and center of how I've thought about the internet for a long time. For most people, though, all we want to do is use it to do good things, and we don't want to think about the bad things. And in many ways, that's how we designed the internet, with this sense of optimism that the world was a great place and that everybody was only going to do good things. And then we've spent the subsequent 30, 40, 50 years realizing the world's a little bit more complicated than that and bad things happen. And we've had to bolt on security. And a lot of that has been security for the core pieces of the internet, which you and I might think of it as people, but really the core pieces of the internet are computers or software. And so over the last 30 years, we've done a really good job of building security into software. We've done things like adding sandboxes to browsers. We've isolated one website from another website. We've recognized that sometimes people make mistakes. And so we've made increasingly sophisticated ways for users to authenticate to services. So now they do things like use a YubiKey or they use a passkey. We've realized that the ways that people want to use services are increasingly complex. And so we've done things like launch mobile devices that allow you to include location data, and all of these other things are sort of grouped in. But all of those are fundamentally about the software and the devices that are connecting to the internet. What we haven't done is think about the actual people. Building something for other person is even more difficult. Anybody who's been in a relationship that tried to do something nice and had it blow up on them knows what I'm talking about. Building something that you want to make helpful, useful, and overall good for a large number of other people is incredibly difficult. That's what we're trying to do. And that's what I'm trying to guide, is a team of people who are trying to build something that will work for lots of other parties. We use the phrase relying party a lot. It's a phrase that gets thrown around in the crypto space when you're describing someone who's looking at a credential and then trying to decide whether they trust that credential. The identity space uses the phrase relying party a lot. A lot of what I'm working on is making it possible for any relying party to use our system and have confidence that it meets their needs. The biggest gap in identity systems is whether you trust the person that issued a credential. When you walk into a grocery store and they say, "Can I see your driver's license?" They look at your driver's license and they say, "Great, you're old enough to purchase this." If you hand them an ID that came from another country, they're like, I don't know if I can trust this. I don't know if I can believe it. And so they'll like do a little bit of looking at you and kind of decide, yeah, you look like you're old enough to buy the thing that you're trying to buy. It's fine. And that type of interaction at scale and online, where there's lots of different relying parties and lots of different sources of truth about whether someone has the properties that you're looking for, is an incredibly difficult system to build. There's a reason why there's no source of truth for identity online. And it's because you have lots of different countries, lots of different jurisdictions, lots of different descriptions of what is acceptable or not. A lot of what I'm doing day to day is trying to think about how to build that into the system. How do I make it possible for any relying party to receive a credential and evaluate whether they trust it and whether they're willing to use it to decide to provide the services that the user is looking for, and do that at global scale? Do that for several billion people every day.
The world's hardest problems can't wait. Food security, energy resilience, the digital divide. I'm Astro Teller. For 15 years, I've worked with inventors and engineers to tackle the seemingly impossible. In the Moonshot podcast, we take you inside X, Google's Moonshot Factory, giving you unprecedented access to the messy, exhilarating journey of turning science fiction into reality. This is the Moonshot Podcast, out now wherever you listen.
Do you ever browse the web in incognito mode? If so, it's probably not as incognito as you think. If you read the fine print, you'll see that all your online activity is still visible to a ton of third parties, unless you're using a VPN. ExpressVPN hides your IP address, making it extremely difficult for third parties to track your online activity. It reroutes 100% of your traffic through secure, encrypted servers, so third parties can't see your browsing history. Plus, it works on all devices, phones, laptops, tablets, and more, so you can stay private on the go. My family's privacy is really important to me, and we've tried a number of VPN products, including this one. ExpressVPN is easy to use. You just fire up the app and click one button to get protected. Protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/shift. That's expressvpn.com/shift, and you can get an extra 4 months free. expressvpn.com/shift.
We've been working on this for about 5 years. We've recognized that some of the core attributes are really, really interesting for people. We've built a early version 2, version 3, now we're working on version 4 of the camera that can evaluate whether someone is a human. We've built multiple iterations of the services and made them more and more secure and more stronger protection over time. And we have about 11 million people who have gone to a camera, become verified, and are using their World ID to interact with a wide range of different services. Everything from online games to there's a chat application to connecting to larger providers as well. how do we make sure that the users that are connecting to games are actually people? Because games is an area where you don't want to play against a bot. You want to play against a person. And 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even a couple of years ago, if you were a decent gamer, you could immediately tell that you were playing against a bot because you could win. And so it was just boring. The real problem we have now, especially in high-end competitive gaming, is the bots are getting to the point where they're better than the people. And so that's not fun for a whole different reason, which is it's just not fair. And so having proof of humanity incorporated into the gaming ecosystem is going to give a huge boost of confidence for top-level gamers as well as lower-level gamers in making sure that they're participating in a fair ecosystem and playing those games. So we're seeing a lot of that momentum as we're getting to a scale now, like I said, with 11 million people that have signed up around the world, where it's starting to be attractive for larger providers of services to think about how they can incorporate it into their environment. And our target, of course, is to try to have everybody in the world able to have access to the service. We have about 1,000 different locations around the world right now where users can walk up to an orb, they can get verified, and they can participate. We think that's going to grow basically exponentially over the next couple of years, targeting tens of thousands by the end of this year. So we should see a really significant growth in number of users that are connected to the world network and also the number of applications that think it's useful because of that scale of that network. Alex Blania, who's a member of the founding team, has talked a lot about the phases of the network. And the earliest phase is just like proving the technology works. And the next phase is beginning to scale the network. And we're at that point now where we know the technology works and we're beginning to scale the network. And scaling the network is a combination of more people being connected to the network, more places where someone can become verified to participate in the network, as well as beginning to have conversations with more parties, relying parties, who want to have their services benefit from the network, right? Benefit from having humans involved. That last phase is about increasing amounts of utility. So when you're on the network, when you are a verified human, you should have the ability to do stuff that you couldn't do before. And some of it is just confidence in your existing service, right? You can play a game right now, but you don't really know whether you're playing with a human or not. There's this really interesting thing that happens, though, when you have a new primitive in a big system, which is properties that you didn't know you were missing start to appear. And we're curious to see what those properties are in this particular instance. I'll give you an example of what I mean, because I know it sounds a little bit esoteric. I worked on Android for almost a decade, building the security model for Android. For us now, we would never think about a world that didn't have mobile devices, right? You would never think about the idea that you could show up in a city and you wouldn't know how to find a map, because you just take your phone out of your pocket and you have a map. And not only do you have a map, but I have a map where it has a dot where it shows you exactly where you are. So that's an amazing primitive that was introduced by having mobile devices. The security of those mobile devices unlocked things that were even more interesting and harder to imagine in the future. The one that I like to talk about is Uber. Like, you land in that city that you've never been before and you say, how do I get to a place? And on the map, you say, take me to here. And not only does it know where you are and know how to route you to that other place, but it knows how to find a person who has a car that you're willing to get into to drive you there. And there's an exchange of funds between your phone and their phone behind some network, all driven by the fact that both of you have mobility provided by your Android phone or your iOS device. And the amount of magic that happens in that interaction is like stunning. At this point, none of us even think twice about it. It just happens. I don't know what the equivalent of that is when you're online and you know that you're interacting with other people. I think in the early days of the internet, we saw some of that. In the early days of the internet, you discovered communities that you didn't know existed, that you were a member of. And there were lots of people who were members of that. I had a conversation with another person here at Tools for Humanity who grew up in a small town in Spain and had a number of characteristics about himself that there was nobody else in his community that was like that. And so for him, 20 years ago on the internet, growing up, he was able to meet those other people. Like, there was nobody who wanted to write software in his town. And so like meeting someone who could do Python scripting was like completely amazing to him. I think there will be those types of experiences that we've sort of lost in the internet today that will reemerge when human-only spaces become more and more prevalent. And I don't That for me is sort of the equivalent of the maps example. Like, I can imagine that because I've seen it before. It's just a better instance of a thing that exists right now. I don't know what the equivalent of Uber is once you have proof of humanity. And that, I think, is a pretty exciting possibility. Just like, what is it? I don't know. Let's find out. We'll find out maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now. But it's definitely not something that we can imagine right now.
This episode was produced by me and Emma Cillekens and mixed by Garret Lang, with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong.